right. Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Hill. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and we're going to just be talking about mental health today. All right. So my background is I work with kids and adults who are experiencing mental health. I'm in private practice now, but I started in community mental health. So my evidence-based practices that I use is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, parent-child interaction therapy, and triple P parenting. So that's really big jargon for I work with kids who have experienced trauma. I work with teens and adults with anxiety, depression, and I do a lot of positive parenting strategies. So I work with the itty-bitties. Anywhere my caseload ranges from age 2 to 55. So I've got a pretty big broad range of who I treat. All right, so some of the things that we'll be talking through is what is mental health, some stats, some questions. I'll need a lot of interaction, kind of the stigmatization of mental health, communication, some coping skills that you can take and use. We'll do an activity, and then I save a lot of room for questions. Any questions starting out? No? Okay. All right, so what do you guys know about mental health? Give me anything, even the stigmatized part. There's not a wrong answer. Mhm. Right. Yep. I actually had to Google what mental health was because I didn't know how to put it into words, and I've been practicing for 8 years. So, yeah. Anyone else? Yep. Meds. You hear things like, I'm a shrink. They're going to the crazy house, right? Like these are all the things that you talk about. But then you see the positive of it is like some therapists, when they're going to school, have to be in therapy while they're in school so that they know what it's like to be on the opposite end of the room. So that's how we destigmatize it some. Another is, I don't know about human services here, but a requirement for kids in foster care, Wake County Human Services, is they have to be in therapy or at least assessed for therapy to see if kids need it. So that's another tad bit of information. Anything else? They're crazy, yep. Something's wrong with them. What did their parents do to them? They're just into drugs. Anything else? Okay. Okay. Let me pull it up on my phone so that I can. All right. Well, that's good. All right. So, what is mental health? I like the definition. Oh, there we go. Okay. That's fine. I've got it pulled up. All right. So, mental health is emotional, physiological, and social well-being. How we handle stress relates to others and make choices. Mental health is a spectrum. So it can be anything from what you've experienced to what you're experiencing in your body. So a lot of what we do is thinking about our thoughts, how they impact our feelings, which how they impact our actions, or how our actions impact our thoughts or our feelings. So many factors that contribute to mental health is the biological factors such as genes or brain chemistry. So that's what we get from our family members or like family history, life experiences such as trauma or abuse or like happy experiences. And then lifestyle and life circumstances, such as diet, exercise, social support, availability, and opportunities to relax. All right, so true or false? Kids can't have a mental illness like depression. Those are adult issues. False. Yeah, so I treat many kids that have depression. You've seen a spike in it because of COVID. All right. Kids that have a mental illness have bad parents. False. So they're, I don't even want to blame parents in general, but you can see like that parenting styles can impact kids, but then it's never because of bad parents. Right. You should stay away from someone with a mental illness. That goes without explanatory. So sometimes you don't even know if someone is dealing with anxiety, depression, OCD. Kids don't have panic attacks. They just yell or cry to get what they want. So a fun fact that you see irritability in teens as a sign of depression. So it's not just isolation, but it's also irritability. Irritability can also be caused with anxiety as well. All right. Having mental illness means you are weak. No. So actually, I say in my office all the time that you have coping skills because you're strong and you're resilient and you can get through it. All right. If someone in your family has a mental illness, you will be diagnosed with a mental illness. So sometimes you'll see like genetic with like if someone in your family has anxiety can be more genetic. Same with like depression, you'll see trends in family. There's also some link to like autism as it relates to genetics as well, but just because someone has it doesn't mean you will have it. You also see it with substance abuse too. All right, so stats. So I broke it down into person, family, and community. So people with depression have a 40% higher risk of developing cardiovascular and metabolic diseases than the general population. People with serious mental health are nearly twice as likely to develop these conditions. Oh, we lost it. So I think it's based on how you take care of yourself. So with depression, you have low motivation, and so going to the doctor takes more work, and you're not, and sometimes with healthy or unhealthy coping skills that are very soothing, like overeating or undereating or staying in your room, I think that impacts your health. The impact of stress on your health is a big thing too. All right, 32.1% of adults with mental illness also experience a substance abuse disorder in 2020. So the reason why that is because, again, unhealthy coping skill, I'll drink to feel better in the moment, but it's actually a depressant, so it makes your mental health worse. I say in my office all the time, it's powerfully reinforcing in the moment, not long term. All right, the rate of unemployment is higher among U.S. adults who have mental illness compared to those who do not. High school students with significant symptoms of depression are more than twice as likely to drop out compared to their peers. Students aged 6 to 17 with mental health or with mental, emotional, or behavioral concerns are 3 times more likely to repeat a grade. Schools are getting a lot better about including mental health in a 504 plan or an IEP so they can get accommodations. All right. Family. At least 8.4 million people in the U.S. provide care to an adult with a mental or emotional health issue. Caregivers of adults with mental or emotional health issues spend an average of 32 hours per week providing unpaid care. All right, so I'm going to give a couple more stats. So 21% of U.S. adults, and these are from the 2022 stats, of U.S. adults experienced mental health in 2020. I guess these are 2020 stats. So that's 1 in 5 adults. 5.6 of U.S. adults experienced serious mental health in 2020. Do you guys know the difference between what serious mental health is? Okay, so serious mental health is what you see with schizophrenia, bipolar, personality disorders, which often go undiagnosed for a while. The other part too is sometimes you'll see traits of it in teens, but teens cannot get diagnosed with anything serious mental health until 18 because their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed yet, and that impacts decision making, emotional well-being. So that's going to impact all of this. So, all right. 16.5% of U.S. youth aged 6 to 17 experienced a mental health disorder in 2016. That's 7.7 million people. And then the other statistic is 6.7 of U.S. adults experience a co-occurring substance abuse disorder and mental illness, which you would see that anyways because you're coping with one or the other. Yes, so it's even bigger now. So I know in Raleigh, and I can't quote for here because I'm not here, but in Raleigh, like there are very few places that are taking referrals because of how big it is, or you're waiting on wait list for sometimes up to a year to get seen. And actually, too, another fun fact is COVID is seen as a criterion A trauma now, which is part of the diagnosis for PTSD, meaning that it's like as high level of stress as like, and this it's different, but like going to war or physical abuse or sexual abuse. So it's in that criterion A trauma because of how much it's impacted. All right. So let's talk about some of the good stats. So 46% of U.S. adults with mental illness received treatment in 2020. 64% of U.S. adults with serious mental illness received treatment in 2020. And 50.6% of youth aged 6 to 17 with mental health disorders received treatment in 2016. The average delay between onset of mental illness symptoms and treatment is 11 years. All right. So one more quick quote about mental health, and then we're going to get into talking about stigma, is the World Mental Health Organization defines it as a state of well-being in which individuals realize his or her own abilities, can cope with normal stressors of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to her community, his or her community. Okay. All right, so let's talk through stigma. Why do people not ask for help? Yeah, it's hard. Yes, that it's hard, that no one wants to admit that there's a problem. You can do it yourself. Fear of the unknown. What will people think of me if they know I'm going to a therapist? Denial. Yeah, being labeled. Even political beliefs. Doesn't exist. I think for stigma wise, personally explaining what I do is really hard, especially with like my grandparents and them understanding what I do. All right. So the biggest thing is we want to understand the person and not the condition. So two quick quotes that I saw, and you saw one of them, but I found another one. So mental health problems don't define who you are, they're something you experience. So we talk about that it doesn't label you. That's why we don't use, we try and change a lot of language so that it's person first. So it's a person who experiences anxiety, not an anxious person, or it's not an autistic person, but a person with autism. Another big language change is death by suicide, not committed suicide. And then the other one I found that I really liked was it's okay to fall apart. Tacos fall apart and we still love them. All right, so looking back on stigma, just overall, just information about it. So it prevents people from seeking treatment and getting support. People feel like it can discriminate in their jobs, education, housing, and medical care. 90% of people experience stigma with a mental health condition, and the experience can be worse than living with mental health condition. All right. Let me make sure. All right. So let's talk through understanding stress and the impact, because I think stress leads on to a lot of different causes and it tables the effect. So stress is not a psychiatric diagnosis, but is closely related to mental health, as stress can be cause of mental health problems and make existing problems worse. For example, if you often struggle with feeling to manage feelings of stress, you might develop a mental health problem like anxiety or depression. Stress can impact overall how you feel physically, and mental health problems can cause stress. You might find coping with the day-to-day symptoms of your mental health problem, as well as potentially needing to manage medication, healthcare appointments, or treatments can be also a source of stress, especially if you're working full-time or if you're kids. Okay. Any questions so far? Mike, any questions online? Okay. All right. So the big thing is how to talk to your kids about mental health. So one of the things is be patient, don't judge or criticize, listen, educate, pay attention, learn, keep checking in, and being forgiving. Now, the keep checking in is a big part because teens are not going to probably always want to talk to you, but it's always good of like establishing some sort of check-in if you notice experiencing it. So what a lot of the things that we do in like my office is that we'll come up with like, let's have like a quick check-in and say like, hey, you're doing good, or thumbs up, thumbs down, or like a safe word, or something like that, that the kids can come if they need that extra support. So the question was, what would be the initial conversation with the child? So that's a tricky one. So a lot of the times it's just observing. Like, I've noticed X, Y, and Z. Let's talk through it, or how can I support you? You could also say, like, is there something bothering you or causing you stress? It's always taking a very soft approach. Like, hey, I've noticed you've been in your room a lot lately. Is something bothering you? Is something going on? because that's a lot of times what you'll see is some of the isolation. Right. All right. So I wanted to just give kind of an overview of depression and anxiety because that's a lot of the two common things that you hear. So how many of you guys have been asked some of these questions when you go to the doctor? Do you have little interest or pleasure in doing things? You guys get asked that? Do you feel down, depressed, or hopeless? Trouble falling asleep. So they're actually screening for depression. So they are doing what's called the PHQ-9, which is an adult screening for depression. What about this one? Do you ever have trouble relaxing or worrying too much or about different things? Perhaps that. So that's screening some of the anxiety. Another one is like feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge. All right, so short-term anxiety for everyone is normal. Even those that don't have anxiety, you can get anxious when confronted with a situation that causes nervousness. People get anxious on first dates, before tests, when they have meetings with their boss. Anxiety is an incredibly normal experience, but one that is disruptive. Generalized anxiety, you will see with someone with generalized anxiety, you see the flight or fight responses is firing all throughout the day at low levels and occasionally can pick up at random times. This may cause shaking to occur. You'll also get the really fast heartbeats. Okay. And then just quick facts on depression. Depression is a common mental disorder characterized by persistent sadness, a loss of interest in activities and that you normally enjoy, accompanied by inability to carry out daily activities. All right. So we're going to talk about what to look for, and then we'll do a couple coping skill activities, and then I'll answer questions. All right, so what to look for is you will see impulsive behaviors or being more irritated than usual, not functioning like their usual selves, change of habits, how they dress, general appearance, eating or sleep habits. I also heard, too, that it can be like personality changes, whether as like more outgoing or less drawn. So if you see like big jumps. Talking about feelings of loneliness or despair, excessive worry, trouble concentrating, and substance misuse. Okay, so let's talk through some coping skills. What are some things that you guys do to cope when you feel stressed? Eat. Exercise. Walking. Breathe. Reading's a good one too. They're powerfully reinforcing, right? That's why we characterize unhealthy and healthy, right? Prayer. That's a good one. Talking to somebody. Meditation is another one. Drawing, writing. Like if you're doing art and engaging in it, art therapy has been found to be really effective in communication because it does connect back and forth and your brain communicates more. It also distracts you. Coping skills are distraction. So that's a lot of what it is, and that's what makes you feel better is you're getting your mind off of your problem. It's the same thing. It's writing out your feelings. So, let me repeat the question. So what does journaling do? So you're writing out your feelings, so it does the same thing, is that it distracts you. So what I tell a lot of my clients to do is if they have a thought, to journal it out, rip it up, and throw it away. and then be done with it. It's called thought stopping. But then also, too, like I have clients that will journal, and then that's how we engage in our session is we'll talk about our week that way. All right. See if I had going outside is another one. Deep breaths. And then they also say like rearrange a room in your house. So that's another one. It's kind of like the reorganization piece. Yeah, it's helpful. I have clients too that I'm like, if your parents don't let you rearrange your room, draw it out how you would want it to look or design rooms in your house. All right, so the last one is self-care. So this is taking care of yourself. So some of the examples that I gave is putting yourself first, even though if it might feel selfish, asking for what you need, setting boundaries, so saying no when you need to, staying at home, forgiving yourself, taking a step back, asking for help, and spending time alone. So there's 2 examples that I give that I use with almost every single client I see. So we talk about your oxygen mask. So what do they say at the airplane? Whose oxygen mask do you put on first? Yours, right? So that you can help others. So you're taking care of your mental health is the same way. So if you can put on your oxygen mask and take care of yourself, then you're able to help others. But if your cup's not full, then you're not going to be able to help others. And then the other thing is we talk about, well, I don't have time to take care of myself. Do you guys brush your teeth? Yes. How many times a day? Twice, right? So that's 2 minutes set aside that you take care of your physical health. What if you took the same 2 minutes a day and worked on your mental health? So doing something for just that short amount of time can make differences. Small changes results in big results. All right. I'm going to go through resources and then I have an activity because I wouldn't be a therapist if I didn't bring in intervention, right? So some resources for finding a therapist. So I'm from Lifeology Counseling. It's a private practice in Raleigh. However, we do telehealth. So I've got cards and marketing materials if there's any that you want to take. And then Psychology Today is another great resource. What you can do is you go onto Psychology Day, you find a therapist. You can put in like all the, like I want this kind of a therapist that's this old, that works with anxiety, depression, that does cognitive behavioral therapy. And then you can put it in there. You can even put in there like, I want a Christian-based counselor, or I want to do this that will specialize. And then it'll filter out results for your area. And then what insurance you have and all of that. In a crisis situation, so now in North Carolina, they came out with a couple months ago that you can text 988, and that's like a mental health crisis line that you can get immediate help right away. Of course, always, if someone's in immediate danger, you call 911, and you can ask to speak to a CIT officer. They are trained in mental health, so they can help de-escalate a situation a little bit quicker. There is, NAMI is a great support. They've got a text line, and then, of course, there's like the domestic violence hotline and the sexual assault hotline as well. All right, any questions before we do the intervention that I have? No? Okay. Mike said that you guys didn't get chocolate because you guys aren't here. So if you're at home and you want to get a piece of chocolate to do the activity, go for it. See, coming in person is rewarding. All right, so we're going to talk about being mindful. Does anybody know what mindful is? Yes. So being aware, being in the present. So we're going to do an activity and then we'll talk about it. All right, so first, take your piece of chocolate, hold it in the palm of your hand, focus on it. Imagine that you've dropped in from Mars and you've never seen an object like this before in your life. Take time to really see it, gaze at it with care and full attention. Let your eyes explore every part of it, examining the highlights, where the light shines, the darker ceases, and the folds and ridges and any unique features about the chocolate. Touch the chocolate with your finger, moving your finger all around the chocolate, exploring its texture, maybe with your eyes if it enhances your sense of touch. Holding the chocolate beneath your nose, with each inhale, notice any smell, aroma, or fragrance that may arise. And as you do this, pay attention to anything interesting that may be happening in your mouth or stomach. Now, holding the raisin between your fingers, slowly bring Now, holding the chocolate between your fingers, slowly bring the chocolate up to your lips. Notice how your hand and arm know exactly how and where to position it. Gently place the raisin in your mouth, or it's the chocolate, sorry, it's raisin on my paper, in your mouth without chewing it, and just notice how it gets into the mouth in the first place. Spend a few moments exploring the feeling of having it in your mouth with your tongue. When you are ready, prepare to chew the raisin or the chocolate. Notice how and where it needs to be in your mouth for chewing. Then, very consciously, take 1 or 2 bites and notice what happens after you bite into it. Experience any waves of the taste that come from it when you continue to chew. Without swallowing yet, notice the bare sensations of taste and texture in the mouth and how these may change over time, moment by moment, as well as any changes in the object itself. When you feel ready to swallow the raisin, see if you can first detect the intention to swallow as it comes up, so that even this is experienced consciously before you actually swallow the chocolate. Finally, see if you can feel what is left of the chocolate moving down in your stomach and sense how the body as a whole is feeling after completing this exercise in mindful eating. All right. Who was able to only focus on the piece of chocolate? Who started thinking about what they were going to have for dinner or what they were going to do when they left here? Be honest. It all happens to all of us, right? Right? It's hard to be mindful and be present in the moment. And that's what the big thing is about coping with mental health, is that depression, you tend to stay in the past. Anxiety, you're staying in the future. But retraining your brain to stay in that present moment is what is helpful for coping skills. All right. The rest of the time, I planned on just having questions or having conversations because I'm used to doing the listening, not the talking. So that's what I figured we would do. And online, feel free to answer or ask questions, and I'm happy to answer them.
How has social media helped or hurt?
So in the fact of like mental health awareness, it's helped because you will see people post about it more. How social media impacts mental health, it tends to be not as effective because there is a lot of research studies that show that the amount of likes that you get or people following you really greatly impacts, especially teens' overall self-esteem. But I am seeing it more, and there's a lot more platforms now too. So there's like networking pages for therapists where you can refer clients and get answers. There's a lot more other like social network pieces on the awareness piece, but just overall how it impacts mental health. And I notice a lot of times that if teens are made to take down their social media, and I know this is a very unpopular opinion for any teens who are watching, but then sometimes you'll see effects, or if it's monitored more closely. Positive effects. There's other ways to connect. So sometimes too, it's like figuring out what's the way or what's a happy medium about connecting with social media too. Because I also think it has negative effects if a teen doesn't have access to it at all, because that's how you talk to people. Yeah, so video games is another tricky. This is when I become the unpopular person in the room when we talk about it. And this is also, I'm going to be unpopular because my husband runs a video game truck. So, so video games is the same, right? So socially, if they're connecting with friends, you can see the benefits of it. But if they're playing hours and hours and hours on end, that also creates isolation. So then it's kind of the mixture of it. And so I think it's all about how you do it in moderation. But I heard a lot of kids in COVID that was the only way they connect to their friends is if they all got online at 7 o'clock and were able to connect. But I think it's all about like the excessiveness, right? If they need to play the video game so bad that they can't go do anything else, that's when it becomes a problem. So that's a good question. Any others? Mike, is there any online? Okay. Yeah, that's a tricky one because kids who are introverted can just enjoy spending time. I would say if they're never getting out of their room, then that would be something, or if they're not really engaging in like family conversations or like family dinners are really important because that's a way to connect. But if you see just kind of the overall decline of it, but introverted is very hard to pick out. But some of it is just personality types, but it's when you notice some of the other changes. Like if you tell them they need to go take a shower and it's like, oh, then that's when you would say, like, overall, besides normal teen behavior or kid behavior. Yeah, so that's a big one. So addressing it in general, I would just say, hey, what's going on? I've noticed some of these changes. Is there anything I can help? What I'm noticing is that it's being caught at the doctor's office because doctors have started doing more integrative health care. And actually, doctors, and I don't know if it's here, but in Raleigh, there are a couple like pediatric offices that are having therapists in there so that they can have that connected referral. So I actually worked in a pediatrician office for probably 6-7 months, and they will do the connection. So they're trying to be more inclusive about screening. And then I think, too, overall, just sometimes normalizing how kids are feeling, because if you aren't showing your feelings, then they're not going to want to show their feelings either. So sometimes normalizing it. So, like, it's okay to have big feelings about this. Yeah, I think if it's normalized, then yes. I think you'll see that kids are reaching out more. I'm noticing that as teens are getting older, they're reaching out for themselves, or they're the ones handling their appointments, or having that independency. I think the other thing, too, is sometimes it's saying, this is something that's between you and I, and not, I'm not going to go tell your parents. So I have a rule in my room that if you're going to hurt yourself or hurt others, or someone's hurt you, then I'm going to take the necessary precautions to keep you safe. But other than that, I say I'm your secret keeper, that I'm going to keep the things here that we talk about here sacred. And I'll say, I'll talk to your parents and say, oh, we talked about healthy coping skills today, or we talked about this, or getting an understanding, but I'm not going to share how you feel, because I think that that's a other thing too, is just that willingness to open up. And then for finding help, Psychology Today is a really good resource. I and just Googling kind of therapy offices here, and seeing, but Guilford County has limited resources too. So I think that's another thing of just overall having it. But Psychology Today is good, and telehealth is actually really effective too, because they can do it from the comfort of their home, and then you're open up to any therapist in North Carolina. Yeah. So for the people online, the question is like, how do you notice the warning signs earlier in teens and not writing it off as something that, oh, he's just being a teen, or one-word answers? So a couple interventions that I use, and all my kids roll their eyes when I use it, but if they say, how was your day? Good. And I'll say, well, your good and my good could be different. So tell me about it. My good, and I have a toddler, so my good is that I didn't get an explosive poopy diaper. And that's literally what I will say. And then they're like, oh, and then they'll tell me more. So sometimes it's like taking the humor of it. But yeah, I mean, that's how we kind of combat it of like, well, what's good? The other thing you could do is like at the dinner table, you could say, all right, let's everyone go around the room and let's say something good about our day and something we would like to work on. There's an activity that I do so I run a dialectical behavioral group once a week, and we do our rose, bud, and thorn. So rose is something positive, bud is something we want to work on, and thorn is something we want to change. So sometimes just normalizing and having that conversation, I think you would start to be able to catch it earlier. As far as like the lazy teenager, you have to look at it, is it executive functioning of like, can they just not manage their tasks that they have? Is it ADHD related? Is it depression related? So it's a lot of just being aware and maybe coming up with a plan and being able to follow through with a plan. You might see some of the changes. But sometimes you will notice as the lazy teenager, either they're bored or they're overwhelmed too. Okay. Okay, so the question is what do you do if you're noticing that your teenager is using unhealthy coping skills to manage being overwhelmed? So I think that goes back to having that openness and having the conversation of normalizing that unhealthy coping skills are powerfully reinforcing that let's find something else that you can do. And then just giving the education. So I don't know what particular unhealthy coping skill, but I know a lot of teens will resort to drugs and alcohol as a way to explore, but then talk about how, well, it's not just smoking pot. I never thought I would say that in this church, but it's not about just smoking pot, but it could lead to other things. It could go to this, it could go to that. So there's a lot of statistics. One point I had, and I can look or I can figure out what it is and send it, but there was like some statistics that you could find on like substance abuse in teens, and how like it talks about how it affects brain development and it does all of that. And sometimes just reframing that for a teen will help and see. So eating disorders are a little bit tricky. Yes and no. So it all depends upon what the relationship is with food is like, but you will not see a lot of um, therapists that specialize in eating disorders. That's a more specialized, so they'll do nutrition and work with the therapist. So anybody that I've ever worked with is a combination, because I can tell you the bare minimum of it, but a lot of it with eating disorders is a lot of medical. There's a really good hospital in Raleigh called Veritas. They get teens and kids from all over the world that treat, and they have like a step-by-step program that you're around other people in a group setting. All eating disorders. Mm-hmm. So what the question was, what can we do as a church? So I think the biggest thing is talking about it, and bringing awareness to it. And then I think it's also like having resources and support that's helpful. I think just the education piece is a really big first step, and just having people as a support and list of resources too. And I think too, a big thing is normalizing for teens that the life that they're experiencing is not typical and normal, and it's normalized to them because they've grown up in a world with a pandemic and mass shootings and school shootings, and to them this is normal, so making sure that it's okay to feel how they feel because these are stressors that are impacting their life. So I think that's something that is really a powerful response. I think sometimes it's just that presence. Yeah. Um, so I think the big thing of like when it talks to like acting on it, I'm assuming you meaning like safety concerns of like self-harm, suicide, homicide. So I think talking about it, you'll assess more and see, and then you can provide better help. Um, so some of the things that you look out for with safety concerns is, do they have thoughts? Is there a plan in place? Do they have means to carry out a plan? And then do they have the intent to follow through? And depending upon where they're in that step, it's like creating a safety plan and getting resources and supports. And I think that's why early intervention is key and powerful. It's key and powerful for even for like preemies that are born early and young children, but I think early intervention of stepping in is because if you're in that crisis mode, it's going to be really hard to get that support and help that you need, or it'll be automatic hospitalization, which then that can create other feelings too. So I think the sooner that you can talk about it, the sooner that it's able to be helped. And I think sometimes too, as it relates to suicide, is that when people mouth off and make comments like, oh, I could just kill them, or I should kill myself, or you should go die, all these things are things that people get told, is helping them reframe that language and change it and assess. So even like I will have someone in the room, if the room that will mouth off and say something like that, I'm like, and then I have had a couple clients be like, don't do the therapist thing. And I'm like, but I am going to do the therapist thing because we're going to talk about it. Because when you leave my room, I don't want to worry about you. So I think even when things are said like that, just bringing that awareness piece of like, this is something serious, you shouldn't be saying it, is something that brings up. I use a lot of humor in my room, but in that sense. Not humor about the situation, but like humor about like bringing it up, because then it makes it comfortable too. Yeah, so the question was about how do we use values in the therapy room. So values are a huge part because, one, it's normal to normalize that kids are exploring, that your values might be different than your parents' values, and it's okay to explore it. I think even along the values of looking at like romantic interest or values in religion or like even like lifestyle changes, things like that. So I think one, normalizing it for teens that it's normal to explore. The second piece is helping them to understand what their values are or what they're believing in, what their parents, and how it can be influenced and within what society values. And then I think then it's like, okay, well, how can we encompass? You're saying that this is really important for you. So how can you use that as a coping skill or something that you can use? Yeah. So if like the boyfriend or girlfriend that breaks up with you, I think it's also listing of like who are your social supports, what are some positive strategies about you, and that'll help build self-esteem. And then yes, saying, oh, it's not just, there's more than just this relationship, that you've got other support networks too. So sometimes it's just in identifying who your social supports are and what are some of the positive things. Self-esteem is huge in teens. Yeah, so self-harm is a big thing. Um, Sometimes you'll see it. Um, you can see sometimes people do it on their like arms and wrists and then their upper thighs, but then sometimes you'll see it on inner thighs. Sometimes you'll see self-harming as scratching and not necessarily like cutting. So I think it's just kind of being aware and like, if you notice that a kid that typically wears shorts is wearing pants all summer, noticing kind of some of the like visual and dress changes, and then also too just doing body, not body checks, but kind of just like looking and seeing is that cutting is also a very powerful reinforcing unhealthy coping skill because people will cut to feel more or to feel less. Yeah, I think that's really hard to put that responsibility on a teen. So I would say, like, if they're reaching out to a parent and the parent kind of getting support and talking through, but is kind of not putting that responsibility on teens, because I think a lot of responsibility as it relates to other teen safety is sometimes put on teens. So I would say, like, encouraging, if it's your child in particular, that they can come and talk to you and you can kind of figure out what to do help-wise. If that's referring to talking to the parents or all of that. So anything that's related to safety, in my opinion, is like an off the question. Like, that's something we need to talk about. Yes, so thinking teens and thinking in extremes. Yes, that's very normal. We do it too, right? This is the best day ever. Or, you know, um, I I only get to do this, or I'm never going to get to do this. The always, the shoulds, I should do better. This isn't as good as I want it to be. So these are called negative thinking. And what you want to do is working on reframing the thoughts and changing the language. So I have an intervention, I call it stinking thinking, is what it is. And it labels all of these responses, and then we work on it. So if I hear it in my room, I'm like, we're doing a negative or stinking thinking. Let's reframe it. So instead of that, I didn't get to do it this time, but maybe I can do it next time. So just working on reframing that thought pattern. That goes back to the cognitive behavioral approach of it's our thoughts that encompass our feelings, which then encompasses our actions. Any other questions? Yeah, so the question is how to see through masking. Um, so the biggest thing is, and the therapy office is a little bit different, right? Because that's where, but I would say, like, just keep checking in of, like, how are you? And I think our automatic response is, hey, how are you doing? I'm good, how are you? Or good, good, right? That's where we leave it. So maybe it's sometimes normalizing it. In the therapy office, we do an assessment the first time, and if I can tell I've got a little bit of a resistant teen, or if I've talked to a parent that was like, they don't really want to come, this was more my idea, in the question I'll say, well, what brings you in besides your parents? And then that tends to be where they'll open up and talk a little bit more, because it's just normalizing that fact of like, I know you don't really want to be here type of a thing. But then that too, like once you build rapport is what is helpful. So in school, they told us that for therapy to be effective, 60% of it is the relationship with the client and the therapist. 20% is, or 30% is the client's willingness to change, and 10% is actually the intervention. So it's all about building that rapport. So I tend to spend a lot of time building rapport and asking questions and getting to know what they like to do in their free time, or what are their favorite restaurants for teens, or who's dating who, and you know, who you like this day and who you didn't like this day, and things like that. Yeah, so you'll see some changes. You can see sometimes like the blanket expressions. You'll see, it also depends on how well someone can mask too. So I think that's a really hard question, but you can see a lot of changes. Maybe they're coming to church and then all of a sudden they stop coming to church, or they are coming to small group but then all of a sudden stop coming to small group. Maybe they stop responding to text, or they take 3 or 4 days to get back to you, things like that. Yes, hoarding is a thing. That's not something that I have necessarily come across. I know it's something that's big, but a lot of it is like, what is the attachment to it, and working through it. You see more of like the exposure therapy that comes from it, or like helping get rid of it. But we talk about like with hoarding or like being attached to something. Sometimes you will see kids who have experienced trauma or have been adopted, that they find like a security blanket, and that's what they hold on to, is a sense of like making them feel safe. So sometimes it's about stuff that makes people feel safe. There are no questions online. I'm good with the power of silence. I use it all the time. Would it be helpful for you guys to understand the differences in different treatment phases and what that looks like in getting into treatment? Would that be helpful? Okay, so I can go through a little bit of it. So you have the initial like referral, so that can come from like a pediatrician, and you can make a referral yourself. School counselors will sometimes do them. And then what you go through is you'll go through the assessment phase. Typically, if someone has never had any mental health treatment before, they'll start out with just outpatient therapy. That's once a week, sometimes every other week, and then monthly, and then you kind of titrate down as symptoms are getting better. If there is a lot of crisis, then sometimes you'll still start with that outpatient therapy, and then there are other resources and supports, and they have them here as well. But there is Outpatient Plus, which is where you meet with a licensed therapist, and then you have like a qualified professional or someone who's not licensed but has experience that they work on skill building with. There is now at Lifeology, we now have an enhanced OPT program, which is you'll have the licensed clinician that you meet with, and then you have a skills training person that comes to your house and does dialectical behavioral therapy, which has proven to be really effective for teens and adults. It looks at the mindfulness activity, emotion regulation, your response to stress, and then interpersonal effectiveness. So then that's kind of like a step-up option. Then they have what's referred to as intensive in-home, or there's other like enhanced services, like now they're all blanking out of my mind because that's what happens. There's like MST, multisystemic family. There's integrative family systems. But there's the higher level for kids that are at risk, and that's like more therapy, more times a week with more crisis support for families. And then if they're still not able to be stabilized, then they look at like therapeutic foster care, out-of-home placement, group homes, and then it looks at hospitalization. So that's kind of like how the step up goes. And I think this is another stigmatized thing, is I think that people think because they have mental health, they're going to be hospitalized. Right now, the biggest reason of being hospitalized is if you're not able to maintain safety. So it's not just because you have anxiety that you're going to be hospitalized. So I think that's another big thing too, is like, well, I don't want to tell somebody because then they're going to send me to the hospital. It's not about that. It's about if you can contract for safety. Anybody else? No? All righty.
Well, I'll get up here and say thank you for
You're
taking your time
welcome.
to be here. And offer a prayer for everybody that's online or watching later, is that mental health awareness is something that Stacy mentioned we need to talk more about. We need to not hide it under the rug or kind of ignore it or label other people with that type of stuff, that we all struggle with something to different levels. And if you need the help, you need the assistance, you have questions, please reach out to me. I have Stacy's contact information, or reach out to a trusted friend and try to get them to come along with you, that not one person should ever have to face this alone. And I think that's important. Let me offer a prayer. Gracious God, we thank you that you're always there, and that we need resources, people like Stacy that you call. And Lord, we don't have enough counselors. We don't have enough therapists. And maybe there's people out there that you're calling them to be gifted in that field, because it's such a long wait for people to get in to see a counselor, in to see a therapist. And Lord, we just want to get all the resources that we can to people who are in need, especially those that are struggling with things that maybe no one has any idea what they're facing. But you, God, you know. Speak to their heart and their soul. Let them know that they are valued children of God, and that we appreciate all that they are, and that you will open up doors for them, even though they feel like there are no doors. We know that you're always there to open doors of opportunities, and you have a purpose for every single person. We just thank you and praise you in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you all so much.